Hey everyone, welcome to another podcast episode. So this is going to be an episode where we start talking a lot about ADUs and diving into the topics. And as you know, ADUs are a very hot topic in Denver, and we're going to start peeling back the onion on ADUs and the ever-evolving landscape here. So my co-host, who you guys will become very familiar with over the next couple years as we talk ADUs and learn everything ADUs around Denver, is Stacy Rozansky. So I mentioned Stacy's name a few podcast episodes ago when we rebranded our firm as Envision Advisors. She's one of our new team members. Thrilled to have her on the team. And one of her interests and specialties is zoning and ADUs. So Stacy, glad to have you on the show.
Hi, Chris. Happy to be here.
So I mentioned your background very briefly, but give everyone the background on who Stacy is.
Yeah, so I got involved, started investing in real estate several years ago, and that led me to getting my real estate license and helping others invest as well. Meanwhile, I also have a strong background in affordable housing, and here in Denver, we've been doing a lot of work with ADUs to help as an affordable housing route for people. So that just furthered my interest and knowledge, and I've really been able over the last couple of years to dive into the world of ADUs.
And it gave you that there's no way, nothing beats experience in going through the process of learning ADUs, talking to municipalities, which I know you've experienced with the work you've done in the past. And that just gives you such an intimate knowledge because there's a lot of moving parts with ADUs.
Yeah, I think it's really exciting and changing for the better that we're hopefully going to be seeing more and more of ADUs being built in Denver and around.
So what we're going to talk about in this podcast is we're going to, the main part of this podcast, we're talking about the basics of zoning and understanding how to read zoning and what zoning works for ADUs. But beyond that, we're going to kind of give you a current landscape on what ADUs are like currently in the Denver metro area. And we actually started, as we were brainstorming this and just some other ideas around ADUs, we were trying to put together almost like a mini-series on just, hey, here's some good content in ADUs. The problem is, though, that ADUs is just it's a very quickly evolving landscape, and there's so many moving parts. We realize, hey, we can't have one static course for a while, but rather we're going to kind of give you a couple bite-sized pieces here, and then just as we find new information, as this neighborhood, this city council updates something, this changes, we're going to report it to you. So a good way to preface this, and this is going to be a series that Stacy's is spearheading for many years to come, because this is, we're all long-term planners here, is, she's an expert in here. She's got a passion in here, which when you overlap those two things, great stuff happens. So a lot of the stuff we talk about ADUs is, the best way I can put it is Stacy is going to act as a reporter and just put together some amazing content and resources as well for everything's ADUs in Denver. So Stacy, let's talk about the current ADU landscape, because this has become, every year more and more people talk about it for two reasons. One, Denver needs the affordable housing, needs more housing, more affordable housing, and a lot of owners are more interested in it so they can have, another asset or rental income to offset their primary mortgage residence or have another rental income. So where do you want to start with the current landscape of ADUs? Because there's a lot to talk about.
Well, I'd like to start with the most recent news, which was that City Council just passed that the Chaffee Park neighborhood in Denver there will be ADUs allowed no matter what the zoning is on your property. So that's the first thing we've seen where you no longer have to go spot rezone or apply for something. It's just any property in that neighborhood can build an ADU.
And do they have to still go get a city permit, I take it, or can they just go out there and swing a hammer?
No, they still have to go through the process for building, but you don't have to get approval, which is what you have to do if you don't have the correct zoning on your property. And so this all started stemming from the Blueprint Denver, which was put out, I think, over a year ago now.
I think it was like a year and a half ago.
And it's kind of the city priorities and how the city envisions the future of Denver.
It's kind of like their 10-year and longer plan, right?
Yeah, exactly. So in that, it pretty much stated that the city, will allow ADUs all over the city, in the coming years. But this was the first real step we saw that an entire neighborhood is on board with it.
Okay, so let's step back and kind of go into more a bigger overview, because that's great news for Chaffee Park, but that's one neighborhood of Denver's 70 something neighborhoods plus all the other metro areas. Mm-hmm. So, and this is one reason why this is such a complex topic, because neighborhoods are going to have their own rules and restrictions on what you can or can't do. The other issue that we've seen, that we read into, a lot of our clients have run into, and just other investors we know, is the cost to build. I mean,
yeah.
ADUs aren't cheap, right?
No. Even though it's a small house, essentially, they're still, can be almost as expensive as building a traditional home, just because you have to put in almost all the same infrastructure and the permitting. You can tap into your utilities of the primary house, but that's still expensive to get out there. So, it still can run upwards of $200,000 to build an ADU.
And I've heard a lot of the quotes I've heard from some GCs I know, and just other investors, anywhere from like 150 to 250 for a modest ADU, and that might be 800 square foot, just ADU out back.
Right.
150 to $250,000, which is a lot of money. And then I've also heard a lot and seen some where they're like $300,000 to $400,000, and I'd say those are much more for people are at a point where they can spend the money and really build an amazing, what they call a she shed, or the man cave, or their garage and the living quarters. They can go really high end. But even for like a modest one that people want to Airbnb or rent out, a lot of times are 150 to 250. But one of the exciting things is there's been a huge, or relatively huge uptick in just modular builders coming in to build ADUs. Can you kind of give us an update on that?
Yeah, so I think a lot of them are still in the starting phases of, how this is actually going to work. But I've seen a lot of companies come out that, they're really doing their best to build these efficiently and reduce those major building costs. So even with all those permitting and other fees that you have to spend to get it up, then this would bring the cost down a lot.
And we said modular. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, that is where they're in a warehouse, maybe in Denver, maybe in Kansas, and they're like a giant warehouse, and it's not something, they build it, and then it comes on a couple flatbed trucks. Yep. It's driven there, and the crane brings 2 or 3 pieces on there, and they bolt them together essentially.
Exactly. Yes. And
so that that allows the economies of scale for they can just hopefully have a couple models, people pick it, and hopefully drive the cost down to be something well below $150,000, because that's pricey. The other thing that you run into then, as you talk about the cost of building, is financing. There's 2 main things here, and we've talked about this on other podcasts here. If I want to go out there and build this $150,000 ADU space, let's say I find one of the cheaper ones out there, how am I financing it? I want to build an ADU in my backyard. Who do I go to? How do I finance it?
Great question. There aren't that many options out there for financing right now. One thing you can do is go for a construction loan. That's one option.
But that often requires a 30-ish% down payment, and going to be at a 5% interest rate.
Yep. And then another option that's common is people will either pull a HELOC on their primary home to help fund the building. But again, you have to have quite a bit of equity in order to fund that $150,000 plus project.
And so for a lot of our listeners, both our clients or listeners in general, a lot of times they're house hackers. They buy a place 5% down. They're not pulling out money in their house anytime soon to go fund a $150,000 little house in their backyard.
Right.
So there's the initial funding of the project, which gets very complex. And the second issue that's just going on in the market is that hopefully you build it, whether it's a construction loan or you have the savings or a HELOC, when it comes out to then do like a longer term takeout financing, because a construction loan is meant to be a construction loan. It's a short term or medium term loan. But a lot of times, great, if I spend $150,000 in ADU, am I guaranteed to increase the value of my property by $150,000? Am I, Stacy?
Unfortunately, not at this time. That's another issue we're running into, is there just aren't enough ADUs out there to compare. And that's what an appraiser is going to use to determine the value of your home. So we need more people building them to get, make sure that we can see those values coming up so that you could refinance out of those loans. Which
becomes a catch-22 almost. Mm-hmm. And just as, for example, like just about 2 weeks ago of when we were recording this, we helped a house hacking client go out there and buy a house with an ADU. So we already had an existing ADU, and we can find those, great. And he was using a lender who was a buddy of his, and the appraisal came in super low, like $80,000 lower. And also part of that is the appraisers had no idea how to appraise ADUs, and that's the other.
Yeah.
But a lot of appraisers they're not familiar with the ADU niche.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's definitely, when you don't see it a lot, then, they don't know how can they compare it to anything else, so they don't know what value to put on it.
And so again, those are just a couple of things going on here, and as to why I don't think ADUs have hit critical mass quite yet. It's just obviously financing is such a critical component to it. Now let's talk about zoning a little bit, and this will lead us into like the main segment of our podcast, Stacy. Zoning. Zoning is not the most straightforward thing out there.
No, zoning is very complicated. I think the city of Denver has done a really good job with, they redid their zoning code like 10 years ago, and it's a little bit more straightforward than you'll see in other jurisdictions, but it's still, if you're not familiar with it, it can be very confusing.
When you say it's better than other jurisdictions, are you talking about like other counties in the metro area or like other cities out of state?
Even within the metro, just other cities where they have either outdated or just more complicated zoning.
And on top of zoning, there's a lot more nuanced rules too for setbacks and how close you are to your neighbor's line or the alley. Like I was just actually talking to someone just a couple days before we recorded this, and I forget what neighborhood his house. I think Sunnyside, and it was zoned for an ADU, and he actually got a quote for repurposing the garage into an ADU, and he could do it. He said he got a hard quote for $90,000. Wow. So for ADUs, I mean, that is a relatively inexpensive ADU. The problem was he was like 2 feet too close to a boundary line or a fence or something, and he couldn't get a variance for it. And so even if it's zoned, you get one of those little issues that just, those can kill the deal. So I think all this will eventually get better and more streamlined, and hopefully just allow us to do more ADUs.
Yeah, hopefully that those kinds of things will be taken into consideration by the city with, all the hoops you have to jump through to get these built. But those are also things that you may run into even if you've done everything right in the process.
All right, so before we transition to like the details of zoning, as I said, I'll reiterate, Stacy's going to be really acting as the reporter for everything ADUs. If you guys have questions, reach out to her. Her contact details on the website, or just email her stacy@envisionrea.com. Plus, just going to reach out to our community, which always provides great feedback. If you're a builder, an architect, a lender, and you play in the ADU space, please reach out. We'd love to connect. Or if you're an investor who's built an ADU, or if you're more common, one of the investors that have looked into it and not be able to make it happen, please reach out too. We actually want to start doing a lot more interviews with investors around town to talk about what their experience was for both building and sometimes just the roadblocks they've run into. All right, so Stacy, we are going to start talking about zoning, and on the screen right now, there is a pretty detailed zoning chart. What are we looking at?
So this is where you're going to want to start if you want to figure out what your zoning means. It's pretty easy to figure out what your zoning is by going to your assessor's site. The Denver assessor site, you can just click on your property and there's a zoning tab. But then, and
let's pause. Let's be because I mean, here's the way I do it. I just go to Google and type in the county assessor's website, and then go put your address, and that's the best way I found to do it.
Yeah, and again, the city of Denver has a great site for that. It's really user friendly, and it will tell you in big bold letters, but it's a bunch of letters and numbers, and then you have to decode it.
And one more thing, sorry, before we dive into here, we're also recording this as a YouTube video, and also the screenshots will be in the show notes as well. So we're going to do our best job to explain it. But if you want the details, click the show notes for more of the detailed screenshots with these, 50 bullet points and numbers you have on here.
Yeah. I think to simplify it down, the easiest thing to know if you have the correct zoning for to build an ADU, there are two things you can look for. One is if you have a TU, which stands for 2 unit, in your zoning. That's one indicator. And the other thing is if you have a 1, the number 1 at the end of your zoning code, that allows for an accessory dwelling, is what that 1 means.
Okay, so from a high level, if you see a TU in the zoning, or it ends with a 1, from a high level, those are good signs.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's usually the way your zoning's written out is 3 sections. It's going to have a beginning, letter, then a dash with 2 letters in the middle, and then a dash with another letter on the end. The first letter in your zoning code is going to describe what they call the neighborhood context. So that's urban, suburban, downtown, industrial, those kinds of things. The second section is going to be what they call the dominant building or character kind of form building that's in your neighborhood. So that's where you're going to see single unit, 2 unit, row homes.
So that's actually talking about like the actual structure of the house or the building.
Exactly. And then the last letter that you'll usually see in the zoning is the size of square footage of the lot, and they just assign, A is 3,000 feet, B is 4,500. So that's just telling you kind of how much square footage you need in order to build what type of building.
And this is how Denver has it. This is all Denver zoning code, right?
This is all Denver specific. Yes.
Okay. From a high level, the other counties around here, are they a similar format, or is it all just a wild, wild west scene?
Yeah, each one is different.
Okay. So we got the first one, neighborhood context. So E equals urban edge. 2 is the dominant building form and character. So E-TU-C. That would mean it's in the urban edge. And that's the type of neighborhood?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, so that's going to be a common, urban edge is basically kind of the secondary ring of Denver. That's what you're going to see within the city.
Like what type of neighborhoods?
Kind of like more on the west side of town, or
like Highlands, Sloan's Lake area, you mean, or?
Yep, those should be within that too. I'm not exactly sure the specifics of each neighborhood, but it's kind of as you come further out from downtown. So downtown is going to be more urban.
Okay.
And then urban edge, right? So yeah, Highlands and Sloan's Lake, those should be. But you'll see a mix of zoning within each neighborhood as well.
Okay, and then get that, and then it's a 2 unit for TU, which is a good sign, and then has, say a square footage size. Now, I've seen this in some zoning, because you're one of the people who have a zoning question. I reach out to, you're on my speed dial for that, Stacy. Like, because there's been instances where, hey, it's zoned for 2 units, but the lot's too small.
Yeah.
How do you figure that from the zoning code, or can you? Or is that as you kind of peel back the onion?
Yeah, so sometimes, there's a million things that can happen to a property. It can get split. Throughout the years, there have been different zoning codes that have happened. So different things have happened. But basically, yeah, if you have a property that has a zoning that says you need 6,000 square feet to do a second unit, but your property's only 4,000 square feet, then you wouldn't be matching the zoning.
And that's where you have to go get assume a variance then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's important to look at the zoning, then actually look at the actual lot size as well.
Exactly.
So as a side note here, I mean, obviously, a lot of the information as we're looking is coming from MLS listings. Those are always 100% accurate, right?
I would always double check the MLS listing.
Yeah. Because that is, we say this and we're both kind of chuckling, but we also bitch about this as well as we're actually working with clients and looking at things. There's definitely, garbage in, garbage out is, a saying we use a lot. Sometimes the agent puts the correct information. Sometimes they don't. So always, always, always double check. All right. So anything else on this slide you want to talk about? Because I've got like 50 questions, but I feel like I should probably hold off on those.
No, I think, again, the main points, the biggest things you want to look for are that TU and the number 1 at the end. And I think beyond that, if you're not seeing those, then we could dive a little deeper into what that means for your property. But that's where I would start.
Can I ask you one more question on here?
Yeah.
So I've seen some zoning codes, I believe, where it's whatever context 1 or neighborhood context, whatever, dominant building form, whatever, but then it ends with like a 2, which is typically means for like, a duplex or 2 unit. Mm-hmm. So if it doesn't have that TU or the 1, but it has a -2, does that mean I can have a single family home and an ADU then?
Yes, it does.
Okay, because that's still, so even if it's got that duplex lot, or zoned for duplex, I can do a single family and then have an ADU.
Yeah, if you're anything where they would call that zoning down. So
Okay.
with a 2 on it, it's my understanding is you could have a duplex and an ADU. So if you were just doing a single family and ADU, that would be a step down.
See that last thing you said you could do a duplex and an ADU?
I believe so.
Okay.
If you have a 2.
Because that's always been one of the questions we've asked. We've never gotten a straight answer. I think it also depends on just
Yeah,
that.
I think that's a question for the city. You know,
Yeah.
you were going to want to verify. And I don't see a lot of 2s on the zoning code or for properties. I just haven't.
Okay.
But I think that's what it means if you have a 2 is that you could have 2 accessory dwellings.
Okay. All right. So moving on here to ADU specific zone districts. I'm going to let you just start speaking, Stacey. I'm going to slide in. I don't know what question to ask.
So I went through, and these are, in general, all the zone districts that allow ADUs that are currently in Denver.
Okay, so I heard what you said, but I did not understand it. So kind of unpack that if you can for me.
So it's just, again, a bunch of jumbled numbers, but if you see any one of these zone districts on your property, then you have the potential to build an ADU without going for a rezone.
Now, when you say a zone district, is that the first letter, or is that all of them together?
Yeah, I guess the combination is the zoning. Zone
Okay.
district zoning, I think, can be interchangeable.
So on here you have suburban, urban, general urban, and urban edge. So that suburban is S, urban is U, general urban is G, urban edge is E. You have a red box around urban edge. Is that specific or just one you want to kind of use an example?
Yeah, I think that's the one I would focus on just because that's where we see most of the properties fall in. That, at least for our investors and clients, those are the areas they're looking in.
Which a lot of times just that like the west, southwest part of Denver. Because that's where you see a lot of the ADUs and moving over to Lakewood and some of those areas.
Exactly.
Okay. So can I just read off a few of these and you kind of explain it?
I can try.
we'll pitch on the spot here. So I'm just going to go look at suburban since this is not in the highlighted red box. You got S-SU-F1. Translate that, please.
Okay, so the S is for suburban. SU is single unit. The F stands for a lot size of 8,500 square feet. And the 1 is the accessory dwelling is allowed as long as you have that much square footage.
Okay, as long as the actual lot matches that.
Exactly.
Okay. So that means I need. I'm sorry. How much square footage is the F?
F is 8,500.
So does that mean in order to build an ADU, I need an 8,500 lot then?
Exactly.
Okay. Next one down is S-TH-2.5.
Okay, so this is a little different. Again, suburban is the S. TH stands for townhomes. And 2.5 is going to be 2.5 stories tall.
Okay.
So it's confusing.
All right. So I'm just going to be because this is how I learn. I think of probably a lot of our listeners as well. So I'm moving down the urban edge box, which I think the one you want to really use examples. So I'm just going to read these off to you, and you can. I feel like I'm kind of like making you Alexa, just kind of like, Stacy, tell me this. So thank you.
No, that's okay. I think the other thing to note is, again, this is very simplified, very beginner version, just to give you an understanding. If you're going to go actually do a building, you're going to want to have an architect or a contractor or a city planner give you all the zoning code is like 5,000 pages. I don't know. It's
absurd.
It's really a lot of in-depth things that you're going to need to know. So this is very much just the high level, basic knowledge.
And that's a really good point. Let's make a very clear disclaimer here that this is for educational purposes. You always need to double check with the city, architects, lawyers. We've had a handful of deals, both some residential deals and some bigger multifamily deals where we've had to involve in lawyers and then drive down to the office, or now call the office with COVID and actually really get into some nuanced stuff. So this can quickly go down a rabbit hole. So yeah, make sure you work with professionals. And we're happy to help you out there, but this is purely meant for educational if you start understanding it. So, okay, on this urban edge section, we've got E-SU-D1, comma, G1.
That was just me being lazy.
Okay.
So it's D1 would be one zoning, G1 would be another zoning that falls in that same.
Okay, gotcha. So that would be urban edge. What's SU stand for?
Single unit.
Single unit. And then tell us what D1 and G1 means. What can we do?
D is 6,000 square feet, and the 1 is for the accessory unit, and G is 9,000 square feet.
So even though, so those are exactly the same, other than 6,000 versus 9,000.
Exactly.
So if I'm building ADU in both, I have to actually make sure my physical lot is either 6,000 or 9,000 respectively.
Yep.
Okay, great. Any of these other ones you want to talk about here?
So there is one, the other thing that we haven't touched on is there's one with a D1 and an X at the end. I'm not as familiar with the
So actually, just read the whole thing.
Okay,
so we can,
there is one zoning called ESU D1X. According to the zoning code, the X is a special provision. So that is something that would be a deeper dive where what does that special provision mean?
Okay. And that's just kind of case-by-case basis? Or just like the asterisks they put on there, basically?
Exactly.
Okay.
That it just might have extra, requirements or certain things you can and cannot build, that kind of thing. So something extra.
All right. Now, before we go to the next slide, from all the stuff that you've been reading and following, these are still like, if generally speaking, if someone buys a lot that has the right zoning, has the right square footage, they can build an ADU, and they're set up very favorably in the future as ADUs become more common.
Exactly. These will be the if you already have the zoning, it's gonna make the process that much easier for you.
All right. So, and what we're looking at here is we're moving this, we got a couple PowerPoint slides we're using to guide us and reference on here. And this is stuff from the blog notes as well. So, again, this has a lot, Stacy. Where do you want to start here?
Really, this is just showing what a detailed page in the zoning code looks like. And I just broke out kind of for the specific urban edge, the E zone district, what you'd want to know. Specifically, I highlighted what the footprint of the ADU can be, depending on your property size.
So I see, footprint, you've got 6,000 square feet or less equals 650 square foot max. What does that mean?
That means the ADU can be the accessory dwelling can be no more than 650 square feet.
So is this pretty standardized throughout the zoning code that, hey, if you got this lot size, your ADU can be this big, and if you got a bigger lot, your ADU can be this big?
That is my understanding, yes.
Okay. So 6,000 square foot lot equals a 650 square foot ADU. 6 to 7,000 square foot lot equals 864 square foot ADU. 7,000 square feet or more equals 1,000 square foot max. And when they say square, I mean, again, I know it's a very hard question, but if I have a garage or I want to build a garage ADU on top, how does that square foot go? Does that mean the garage and ADU have to be under 650 square feet, or?
I don't believe so. I think this is just pertaining to the ADU.
To the actual living space.
I believe.
Because, garages are not living spaces.
Right.
Okay.
I think it's just, and then the thing to note is 1,000 square feet is the largest as of right now that you could build an accessory unit.
Have you seen anyone, getting variances to build bigger ADUs?
I have not, but if somebody out there has done it, I'd love to talk to you.
Yes. Okay. And what about, just kind of give us unless it's in the future slide, the quick rundown on just some general setbacks and height things to consider.
Yeah, I think, like you said before, here I have it listed that there's a 5-foot setback for the sides and the rear of the property. Another thing to note is that the accessory unit must be in the rear 35% of the lot. So that's kind of an interesting...
Sorry, say that again?
The it has to be in the back of the lot. In the back 35% of your lot is where you need to build it.
So if I have a 100 square foot lot, it has to be in the back 35 feet of it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's just a lot of specifics on the size you can build it, where on the property you can build it, and then also like the item called bulk plane that has to do with the angles of the roof line to make sure that you're not shading someone else's property or things like that. So those are all things that, again, you're going to want to talk to a professional architect about to make sure that whatever you design would fit within these parameters.
And from, a lot of the investors I've talked with, that's the stuff, not so much the footprint and zoning, because that's usually, it's those the setbacks, the bulk plane, the height. That's where I've seen so many deals get either blow up or just take a sharp left turn and they have to do some major planning adjustments. Like another one, and actually we're going to have these clients on a podcast in the future, hopefully. They built an ADU in their house, I think near Sloan's Lake, but their lot came near a telephone pole with Excel. Then they looped in Excel, which was a whole other pain in the butt. So all this nuanced stuff is what makes ADUs very, very tough right now. And just, hey, zoning looks great, passes a sniff test, we like to say, but then you can really get the devil's in these other details.
Yeah.
All right. What else, Stacy? I flipped this slide. I'm not sure if this is the right slide to go to or not.
This was about, there is actually a map on, if you go to denvergov.org, that shows you what I just, wrote out, which was where the zoning is for accessory dwelling units.
Okay.
So if you go to their website under their maps section, you can take a look at that. And
then we'll put this link in the show notes as well because it's a long URL, so check out for that. Now we're looking at a complex table here. Where do you want to start here?
This, again, just some details on, so now that I've told you what kind of lots you can build on, how many of those actually exist?
Oh, all right.
It looks like the formatting's a little off, but it looks like, and this was really, again, we just did focused on the urban edge district, but actually the most amount are properties between 6,000 and 1,000 square feet, so that's great.
You said between 6,000 and 7,000 square feet?
Yep.
Well, that's not surprising. I mean, the standard Denver lot size is 6,250.
Mm-hmm.
6,250, so that makes sense. So this is actually a really interesting chart. We'll clean up the format, put it on the website, but I mean, to read off, like there's about 1,800 with that ESU zoning with between 6,000 to 7,000 square foot lots, which is a lot of the places we see. And all those other ones, they're well below 1,000 based off of, and the way it's laid out, she's got lot size and then the corresponding to like the district zoning code. Yeah. That's really interesting. So how did you pull this data? Was this just stuff you...
So the city of Denver puts it all out there in one giant spreadsheet. So you just have to filter through what you're looking for.
Okay, so, all right. So this is really good. So yeah, check out this, and then we can put the link to the Denver that Denver page as well. All right, Stacy. So that was a really good, dive into zoning, help kind of explain things, and I know it's a lot to unpack. What other things do you want to mention before we wrap up?
I just wanted to say that, we're getting into a lot of specifics about zoning, but hopefully, we won't need to in the future because ADUs will be allowed on most every property.
Have you been able to wave that magic wand yet?
I'm working on it.
All right. And we've talked about Blueprint Denver. We're talking about some zoning changes. I mean, you've worked with municipalities for years. I mean, what type of time frame, like how slowly does the government, all the different divisions move?
Yeah, if you have the correct zoning, then it shouldn't be a long time frame for you to go, design your unit and get permits. It's if you need to rezone that really is where you can get held up. There's just a lot to that process, and they usually say about 4 to 6 months for a rezoning. So that would be at the start, before you could even start your project, that You're already set back that far.
So we've got a couple frequently asked questions here, so I'm going to fire around you, Stacy.
Mm-hmm.
How much are permitting fees?
I don't know the specific cost of permitting fees. Obviously, that's going to vary per project, but but they can be up to almost the same as if you were building a regular single-family home.
Can I sell my ADU separately from my primary house?
So this will depend on your zoning. If you have a single unit zoning, then no, you cannot sell it separate from your house. If you have a 2-unit zoning, there are ways where you could separate the lots and sell them separately.
Because I've seen a few of those where people have been able to, they've built the ADU and then sold off as a separate lot and separate house. So it depends on the zoning there for that.
Yeah, and again, these are the rules as of right now.
Yeah.
They could change in the future.
So I guess from a high level, that's not much different from like someone, buying a lot, scraping the house, building a duplex, putting up a party wall and selling off unit A, unit B to person A and person B then as well.
Exactly.
Okay, so same concept there. Ooh, can I build an ADU myself?
You cannot.
Why?
As of right now, well, you can't. I should say you can if you have a general contractor license.
Ah, okay. I think that's been ever since I started, kind of talking about ADUs. That's how it's been as far as I can remember.
I don't know the specific reasoning, but
my guess is they don't want handyman homeowner putting up
right.
janky ADUs that
Right.
don't meet code and don't go in the sewer line correctly and all that.
Right. Yeah. Certainly for the major construction items.
Cool. Stacy, this has been great. So I appreciate this. I learned a lot. Listeners out there, if you guys have questions, reach out to Stacy. If you guys have any experience ADUs, you got a story to share, an interesting anecdote, please email Stacy at envisionrea.com, and her information in the show notes. Be on the lookout. We're going to be doing a lot more podcasts around ADUs. We're going to bring up-to-date news on there. And as we get more information, we will build out a section on the website with, references to architects, builders, maybe some modular builders, and just really hopefully start putting up like an online library as a resource. So stay tuned. Thanks a lot, Stacy.
Thanks, Chris.